the problem for us, Randy, is that the things that fade into the background of our lives are the very things that make life worth living, right? Our health, our impactful jobs for patients, our families, our kids, all of these things are just taken for granted.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. My guest today took a rather circuitous course on his journey to becoming a physician. Now he has some rather profound ideas about how all physicians might benefit from a new perspective on their career goals by taking advantage of positive psychology and mindfulness. So let's hear Dr. Sanj Katyal tell his story. I'm really looking forward to my conversation today with Dr. Sanj Katyal up in the Pittsburgh area. Sanj, I have been absolutely fascinated with the work that you've done, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So welcome to Prescription for Success.
Thank you very much, Randy. I'm happy to be here.
So as always, I'd like to get started with your origin story, Sanj. In your young life, were there any influencers that would eventually point you toward a career in medicine? Were there physicians in the family? What's the story on that?
I was born in India. My parents are first-generation immigrants here. I came over when I was a year old.
Wow.
So the Indian culture, it's very important that kids are educated. They are often strongly encouraged to go into, medicine, law, or engineering. And so, my dad is a PhD in biochemistry. He taught at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, ran a research lab for his entire career, was, self-funded with grants. And so he was very much pushing me towards medicine. And I was not completely sold initially. I thought I might want to go to business. I went to Carnegie Mellon for engineering just because I liked math and science, and thought I'd probably go to the Wharton School of Business or something like that, or maybe become a patent attorney.
Well, that was a question of mine when I looked at your bio, your BS. You were actually an honors graduate in chemistry and biomedical engineering. And yes, looking at that, I wouldn't have guessed that you would be on your way to becoming an expert at mindfulness and psychology. But was there any interest in those more humanistic endeavors at that time or not?
Yeah, I mean, thinking back, so first of all, in college, there definitely were. I almost got a minor in philosophy. So I took a bunch of philosophy classes at Carnegie Mellon.
That's really interesting.
And really enjoyed them. It's very one-dimensional engineering curriculum and leaves very little space for any outside endeavors. Mm-hmm. But I had 3 or 4 philosophy classes, which I really enjoyed. And, thinking back to my childhood, we would visit India to see my grandparents every 3 or 4 years. And I remember looking at books when I was probably, 10 or 12 in these bookstores. And I'd naturally gravitate towards books from this guy, J. Krishnamurti, who's a pretty famous Indian philosopher. And, I've always kind of gravitated to books that help us explain how to live better.
Sure.
And so I think that's always been kind of there inside me.
So what was the next step when you got that BS in your hand?
Well, I realized that I didn't want to make money just for the sake of making money, and the biomedical engineering side kind of exposed me to the human body, and so I decided to apply to med school.
And that happened fairly quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little late, so I had to take a year off. I worked as an engineer and studied for my MCATs that year, but
What was that like? What was it like being an engineer?
it was not too bad. It was not too bad because I knew I wasn't going to do it for the rest of my life. Let's put it that way.
I see.
I mean, I was in like these, steel treatment plants in the middle of Kentucky and, setting up their chemistry labs and stuff. So,
Yeah.
for a 22-year-old, making a little bit of money and traveling, that's pretty exciting. But, I knew I'd made the right decision not to work as an engineer for the rest of my life, for sure.
Right. And so the next step was medical school at NYU. And when you got there, did you feel immediately like you were where you belonged?
Not quite, because I had started dating my now wife back during that year I took off. She was working in Pittsburgh, and I had significant kind of doubts about whether I should have been at the University of Pittsburgh Medical School versus NYU. But I just, I applied and I entered NYU because it was just a better ranked medical school, and I wanted to live somewhere else for a little bit. So I had a little growing pains in New York City for a while, but I'm very happy that I went to NYU. Made some great friends, had awesome training.
Did you like New York?
Oh, I love New York, and I think everybody could do well having a short stint living in New York, because you're not afraid to come back and explore the city, and it really is a great place to visit, especially
It really
if you know
is.
how to navigate it.
If I were going to relive my life, I would probably try to spend a little of my youth in that city, because it's really a great place to be. But the academic approach to medicine, in contrast to what you previously experienced in chemistry and biomedical engineering, was there any dissonance there, or what sort of effect did you feel?
Yeah, it was totally different. I mean, engineering was all about, we had open books. It was just all about problem solving. Medicine was just, to me, was just rote memorization in med school, until obviously you got to the advanced clinical years, and then you started seeing patients and tried to figure out diagnoses and stuff. But for the most part, the education was totally different than what I was used to, and took a few months and several tests to figure out that I really needed to retool things. I couldn't just simply understand concepts, but I really needed to memorize to a very detailed level.
And at what point did you begin to feel like radiology was going to be your eventual specialty?
I took a rotation. NYU is pretty much of a powerhouse in radiology, still is. And I did a rotation as a third year, and I saw all these physicians from every specialty come in and get their answers from the radiologist, and they were involved in the care of basically virtually everybody in the hospital or from every specialty, and so I thought that was really cool. And I obviously, as an engineer, I love the high tech stuff, the machines, the CT scans, the MRIs, and did some early stuff in interventional radiology and PET scanning, and did some research in that.
So you went ahead with the decision to go into radiology. Did you have any feelings at that point about what the long term would look like? Would it be private practice? Would it be academia? Or were you just taking it one day at a time?
Yeah, I didn't really think too much about that back then. I just kind of wanted to match into a good residency, and Pitt was another big powerhouse of radiology, especially the kind of the fathers of body CT, so liver imaging and belly imaging. Two of the three big ones were at Pitt as chairman and vice chairman. So I applied there. And obviously, I wanted to return to Pitt too because that's where my fiance was at that time, and so that's what happened. And it was a great experience. I did internship, 4 years of residency, and then body fellowship at Pitt.
And so when you were finished with your training, what was the next step for you?
The chairman was trying to get me to stay on at Pitt as faculty, and there was a private group that was kind of quasi-academic that had a radiology residency across town here. And the head of that group was actually the president of the American College of Radiology, so he was a bigwig, and he contacted me. So I went and interviewed, and I figured I could always come back to Pitt if I wanted to. But it's hard to leave the institution that you trained at once you stay there. And so I figured I'd give it a shot, and I'm happy I did. I was with that practice for about 9 years, teaching residents, learning how private practice groups work, how insurance reimbursement works, and I kind of shifted the focus from the content and research of radiology more towards the business side of medicine and radiology during that time period.
Mm-hmm. What kind of impact did that have on your general outlook about where medicine in the U.S. is headed as you began to get more familiar with the financial structure that holds it up?
Firstly, I was fairly dismayed that I hadn't learned any of this stuff in med school. Really had no knowledge of any of this, mm-hmm. and the key drivers that make doctors' practices successful. Mm-hmm. And so that was an eye-opening experience. And then I realized that I needed to get, not just me, but physicians needed to get better at becoming well-versed in the financial and business aspects of medicine. Otherwise, we were just going to basically become commodity factory workers, which in a lot of cases, that's what we've become.
Well, that was going to be my next question, and it certainly seems that way to me. And people that have conversed with me on this subject before have heard me say many times that the instant that a physician begins to work for anybody other than the patient, it's a bad thing for the patient.
Yeah.
Was that your feeling as well, or am I just being too Pollyanna here?
No, I mean, I think that's an ideal that we all should be held to. And I think that's true. I think there have always been probably some incentives that aren't aligned with patients, even in the olden days with private practice and fee for service and all of that stuff. But I think it's become much more flagrant that the bottom line is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you had a moment of sort of, why didn't somebody tell this to me before, as you began to learn about the business of medicine? Do you think we should be making unmistakable efforts toward educating not just medical students, but residents on exactly how medical economics works?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they should have a 6-month mini MBA or executive MBA or whatever as part of medical school, so everybody comes out with the same level of business acumen that the MBAs come out with. Because they can't learn to do what we can do, but we can easily learn to do what they can do.
Good point.
And that's the problem, and that's part of when we can get into why I convened a group of experts, physician experts, to create the course that we wish we had in medical school. That was a big part of the reason for doing that, is because I want to keep good people in medicine, mm-hmm. but I want to give them the tools to really be able to practice at a high level and successfully. And so financial literacy and business principles, those are big parts of it that we have to become more expert in.
One of the things along those lines that I have found most intimidating is that in that world of economics, there is a completely different language that's spoken, and it can be, at least to me, very intimidating. And it can make a person feel as if, well, gee, there's no way for me to participate even in this conversation. Did you ever feel that way, or do you think a lot of other people feel that way?
think about the language of medicine. Think about the words that we take for granted. That's far more extensive than the business language that the business people use. So I learned all this stuff because I joined a private radiology startup as my second job. I was recruited by another radiologist to head up clinical operations there, and I managed a group of about 100 radiologists and
Wow.
help grow the business from 2 hospitals to 40 plus hospitals over a span of 9 years or so. But during that time, myself and the chief medical officer interacted very closely with the CEO and the CFO on the business side of the practice. And it's not that hard. I mean, it just takes a little bit of time. I took a couple of courses from the American College of Physician Executives on like financial decision making, and there's some other stuff on just financial terms, learning what EBITDA means, key performance indicators of a business, all these things. But it's not that hard. It's much easier for us to do that.
And you clearly became a really important person in your radiology group, it sounds like, and very successfully, it appears.
It was fairly satisfying because it was something, I'm probably like yourself and other physicians listening, we're kind of constant learners and curious people. And so learning this whole new side of medicine and radiology, and, I learned about private equity and, met with the board members that were, venture capitalists. And so that was a fairly interesting period.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. And so the next very interesting thing that comes along in your evolution, at least it's very interesting to me. Here you are very well educated and competent in a highly technical specialty, and then you become very well educated and very effective in the understanding and the execution of medical economics. And the next step for you is you wanted to become involved in positive psychology. And I'm interested to know when that idea occurred to you and the why of it as well.
that was kind of an unexpected twist. When I was working as a physician executive, I would visit a lot of these hospitals in various states, and I met with like the physician leadership. And what I began to notice, this is probably, I don't know, 2011, 2012, was a growing discontent among most of the physicians that I encountered back then. It didn't matter what specialty they were, and they just seemed unhappy. And then, I looked around at my own group and I remember driving home one day from one of these hospitals and I, wondering to myself why I wasn't happier. And it's not that I was unhappy. I mean, I had achieved pretty much everything I had set out to do in life. I was married to my best friend. We have 4 healthy kids. Both sets of parents are alive, so I began to really worry to myself that if I couldn't figure out how to experience more joy and more meaning when things were this good, how was I ever going to deal with any real adversity when, I knew it would inevitably come, which, by the way, it has since then. That's when I really decided to shift focus because I realized that all these things that I had achieved didn't provide lasting fulfillment, and I needed to understand why. So I began to study philosophy, psychology, and organizational leadership and various things. And I stumbled upon a book by this guy, Tal Ben-Shahar, who was a Harvard psychologist, called Happier. And I reached out to him and told him what a great book it was and asked him where I could learn more. And he invited me to apply to this positive psychology certification 2-year program that he was running. And that's basically the start of my entry into positive psychology.
That's very insightful at that particular stage of your career. And as you say, having not faced any serious adversity at that point in your life, you already felt the need to be prepared for it. Do you have any idea what it was in your life that put you in a position to have that realization?
I mean, I think I've always been interested in how life works and how to live kind of a optimal life. I don't know that I use those kind of words, but I was always trying to figure out why things happen the way they happen, why I acted certain ways. I remember reading books in high school called, I read I'm Okay, You're Okay. I read Power of Positive Thinking. I read Dale Carnegie's classic books. So these were kind of natural inclinations of interest of mine.
Do you think that your exposure to Eastern thinking and Eastern philosophy may have put you in a better position to come to that realization?
Perhaps. I think the, East has always been much more focused on inner development, largely to the expense of, outward material gains. And the West is probably just the reverse. So I think, my natural inclination is more towards the East. My early exposure is from that side.
And so armed with that amplification of your insight about mindfulness, what was the next step for you? Did you wake up one morning and say, it's time to write a book? Or probably wasn't that simple. Where did you take it from there?
Yeah, I completed the certification program. I also did positive psychology coaching, and I continued to practice at the private startup till about 2017, and then we had some leadership change on the business side, and it became fairly antagonistic to physicians, and which I wanted no part of because I was only there as long as it was good for physicians. Like if I could tell a radiologist that I was recruiting that this is a good place for you to work, and I'm going to ask you again in a year, and you're going to tell me, yeah, you were right. And that's what everybody told me. But when we had leadership changes, I couldn't say that anymore. So I left and wasn't really sure what to do, but I wanted to write some of the realizations that I had experienced over my life, but particularly over the last 8 to 10 years for my kids. And so the book idea was really just a continuation of the final project that I had in the certification program. I wanted to write something that I wish I had read when I was 20 years ago, and I wish my kids could read if I'm not around.
Yeah, that's the first line of your introduction, and I can tell you I absolutely cannot wait to read the rest of your book, but the introduction by itself is very impressive. It's called Positive Philosophy, Ancient and Modern Wisdom to Create a Flourishing Life. If you were asked to describe what someone might learn from your book in 60 seconds, what would you say?
Positive philosophy is basically taking the best of philosophy, which I think are the goals of philosophy, of learning how to live better. I think that's the goal of philosophy. The problem with philosophy is that it's just a bunch of guys' opinions with no kind of evidence-based proof of anything that actually works. And I took the goals of philosophy with the more evidence-based research findings of psychology, or really positive psychology, and combine them into a framework for optimal living. I think positive psychology has some decent science behind some of its findings, but it's often mixed in with the pop psychology or self-help movement with platitudes and things that just have no basis in reality. And so I wanted to take the best of positive psychology, which is evidence-based research findings, with the original goals of philosophy, which is how to live better, and combine them and discard basically everything else from both sides.
Can you talk about a few, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of those key points in a more grounded life that you get from the ancient philosophers?
Well, the Stoics back over 2,000 years ago believed that we should be indifferent to our external circumstances as they relate to happiness, because they eventually don't make that much of a difference over time. So what they focused on, what Aristotle focuses on, and Socrates and all the Western philosophers, is character development and virtue. Basically, you develop excellence in character, or what they call virtue, and that is the key to living a good life. And don't worry about anything else. Positive psychology studied that same process. It's called hedonic adaptation, which basically means we adapt to everything in our life that's constant. And this is an evolutionary wiring. And so every stage of our life, getting into med school was so awesome, but it quickly became your new baseline, right? Finishing residency and becoming an attending and making much more money was great at first, but then you got used to it, your lifestyle expanded, and it became your new baseline. That's hedonic adaptation. Basically, we will eventually take for granted everything in our life that's constant. That's an evolutionary trap of our minds, an evolutionary protective mechanism, because if we couldn't adapt or get used to things in our life and our surroundings that are constant, we wouldn't be able to recognize new stimuli or potential threats from old ones that should really just fade into the background. The problem for us, Randy, is that the things that fade into the background of our lives are the very things that make life worth living, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our health, our impactful jobs for patients, our families, our kids, all of these things are just taken for granted. And I'm speaking strictly from personal experience first, and then from working with lots of physicians over the years. That's the human default condition. That's one kind of big one that I talk about in the book, and then there's some antidotes to that I get into. But basically, forcing ourselves to pay attention to the things in our life while they're still around is how we remember them, and how we stop taking them for granted. And that's the power of, there's a lot of talk now about gratitude journaling, cultivation of gratitude. That's why gratitude works, because it's an effective antidote to hedonic adaptation.
You're actually involved, as I understand it, currently in some research in the area of effectiveness of positive psychology. I have to tell you, for a sort of a black and white surgical type of mentality like I have a hard time understanding how you study that and what you might have learned. Can you enlighten me a little bit?
It's definitely a soft science. So, it's not, there's no bench research, there's no, randomized controlled trials and stuff like that. I mean, the way to tell if something works or not, or the effectiveness of a positive psychology intervention, is to use statistically validated questionnaires that are basically self-reported, right? So right there's some room for, interpretation and stuff. But, there are a few interventions that, when studied, and that have been replicated in multiple populations in multiple locations across different cultures of the world. And, putting together a program that just takes the best interventions, the fewest that are needed, but to give you the biggest bang for the buck is what I'm studying, along with a few other people across the country together to just figure out what's the most effective for physicians.
Well, Sanj, it certainly sounds like you're in a position to have a fairly profound impact on this thing that we like to call physician burnout. And, this is something that I think most of us agree is the real thing, but what's behind it, what causes it, and how to deal with it, I don't think has really been elucidated particularly well at all. But it sounds to me like you're probably right on top of it. First of all, would you agree with that assumption?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm right on top of it, but I'm certainly very interested in understanding it. And I really don't even use the word burnout because I think physicians and I think people in general deserve much more than just the absence of burnout.
I was very impressed that terminology was absent from anything that I've seen of your writings or your conversations. But go ahead. I apologize for the interruption.
Yeah, no. So, yeah, I mean, I think, the absence of burnout does not equal wellness. And that's something that I try to drive home because, we've worked really hard and a lot of people are across different fields work really hard. And I think we all deserve to do more than just function, to just get through the day, look forward to the weekend or our next vacation. We deserve to have a life of joy, of meaning, of purpose, of enthusiasm. And so to me, the absence of burnout is a very low-hanging bar. I think if we can figure out how to move people towards flourishing, we're going to move those people away from burnout as a natural side effect.
That's a very optimistic way to look at it. And I'll tell you, I really do make an effort not to personalize these interviews too much, but people who listen to the podcast have heard me say that for nearly 4 decades in my practice, I never experienced anything that felt like burnout. In fact, I couldn't wait to get to work the next day. And where it changed for me was as I approached retirement, I entered into a relationship with the hospital where I was subject to their control. They were running a business as they saw it, and they were exerting a level of control on me that I felt to be invasive and intolerant of, or at least an unwillingness to hear my side of the story, which was, at least to my way of thinking, to be there for the patient. And it was at that point that I really became to be massively disappointed. And that was when I decided to get out of it. Looking back on it, I wish I had had the presence of mind to understand what was actually happening, and maybe even to have read your book. That might have saved me at that point. But nevertheless, I'm doing something now that I feel is a substantial contribution. But my point in that rambling was simply to say that, a lot of people think that burnout has always been there, and I don't think it has. I think it's a new phenomenon, and I think it has something to do with the new relationship where physicians work for a company and not for the patient. Do you think that could possibly be true?
Oh, no question. I mean, systemic factors and the changing culture of medicine is a huge part of it, and that's why financial independence and the ability to work on your own terms is something that has to be taught at an early stage of our careers, because there are 5 to 10 key financial principles and 5 to 10 common financial mistakes that young physicians make, and they're very common, and to basically organize those and say, here's what to do, here's what not to do, and by doing this over your career, you're going to have more ability to call your own shots. So in the example you provided, you were fortunate because you had that and you could just walk away. But if there's a young physician that's just starting out in that environment, they're not going to have the 40 plus years of great practice that you had. They're just going to have misery from day one. And so I think financial literacy and independence is key, because you can then say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'm going to do something else. And then also being able to evolve on the business side of things, if that's your natural inclination, to be able to have more physicians in leadership positions to be able to counter simply the bean counters. That's another avenue away from that. But systemic factors are huge, and they're not going to go away by mindfulness classes and resilience modules given to physicians. I mean, we're the most resilient people out there. We don't need more resilience training.
Well, I have really enjoyed having this conversation with you, Sanj. You are remarkably insightful, and I think you are providing a tremendous service for the new physicians that are about to enter our world and will be taking care of us as we get older. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. We are at the point in the program that I actually enjoy the most, and that's where I get out of the way. And I'm going to close my mic and listen quietly as Dr. Sanj Katyal gives us his personal prescriptions for success.
Okay, thanks, Randy. I decided to write a letter to my younger self, so here it is. You have a life of achievement ahead of you. You are highly motivated and hardworking. You will find much success out in the world. Right now, you feel incomplete. You're searching for that next level in life to be able to finally relax and be happy. You want to advance in your career. You want to make more money. You want to start a family. You want to have some fun. All important aspects of life. Here's a realization that it took me 50 years to understand. What you are looking for will not be found in your bank account, your job title, or your accolades. You are looking for lasting satisfaction in a place that can never provide lasting satisfaction. Let me explain. Everything that you do will be an attempt to feel better because most of the time you are filled with varying degrees of discontent. There is always something that seems a little off, one final piece out there that is forever missing. Relax, this is not just you. This is the default state of most people. The reason you're trapped in this state of what I call visceral discontent is because you're trying to find fulfillment through your mind, which by its very nature cannot be fulfilled. You see, at the most basic level, the brainstem and limbic system are concerned with autonomic function in hostile environments. The mind adapted to constantly search for threats and opportunities in the wild. Watch how a dog behaves, constantly on the lookout for dropped food or opportunities and strangers, threats. But as we evolved as a society, the mind grew the prefrontal cortex to be able to effectively deal with these societal interactions. The mind has created this persona or identity that you see when you look in the mirror. We call this ego, not in the sense of bravado, but as this manufactured self. This ego is still the mind and only concerned with survival. This ego still constantly searches for threats and opportunities. It can never fully rest because resting would threaten its very survival. The mind, or ego, will never be saturated no matter what you achieve out there in the world. And this is why we take for granted stimuli in our lives that are constant, which is hedonic adaptation, as we become enamored and focused on new stimuli. This hedonic treadmill keeps us locked firmly in the future, chasing the next level. Remember the thrill of getting into medical school, which is quickly replaced by the stress of matching into a good residency, or the excitement of making partners quickly replaced by dreams of retirement. The mind is clever. It keeps us toiling away looking forward to the fruits of our labor, but in the end, the fruit is not as sweet or as lasting as we thought it would be. And this is the truth. The mind does not care about our peace, happiness, or contentment. It only cares about survival. It cares about building up your ego, making your manufactured self strong, and always looking to the future to make sure it's still around. But deep inside, our core being, our unique potential remains unexpressed and held hostage by this protective shell of our mind. And the tension between our core being's unfulfilled potential and our mind's demand for survival is why we often feel irritable, anxious, depressed, and discontent. We look for a relief from this pain, no matter how brief, and we chase various forms of pleasure, money, titles, alcohol, distractions, all in an attempt to feel better. This insight allows us to finally understand the futility of this chase. All chases only lead to more chases. Nothing in the world lasts, and all pleasures fade eventually. Either the fortunate event is replaced by an unfortunate one, or we adapt to it and eventually take it for granted. With inner exploration and understanding, you can stop searching for satisfaction out in the world. You can move beyond the emotional roller coaster of stress and anxiety to access a deeper level of flourishing through the realization and fulfillment of your unique potential. So search inward and discover your true core being. Understand the patterns and inclinations of your mind. Most of the self-help movement is concerned with downstream techniques to modify behavior. Go upstream to the source. Watch your thoughts and emotions as they cause desires within you. Understand them, and most importantly, know that you are separate from them. You are not your mind. You are a divine core being with unique potential ready to be fulfilled. This is your only true search in life. And those are my prescriptions for success.
And Dr. Sanj Katyal, we are blessed to have had the opportunity to converse with you today, and we appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. Before you go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience where they can find you, and you can tell us anything that you would like for us to look for, and it can be websites or email addresses or where to find your book or anything that you like. What do you have for us?
Well, I've collaborated with 4 other physicians to try to create a course that we wish we had in med school. And the genesis of this is really, I got tired of all of these businesses out there trying to help physicians leave medicine. And I wanted to do something to keep good people in a good profession. And so all of us are practicing physicians. We have no interest in retiring. We have no interest in leaving medicine. We don't run this course or create this course as a profitable side gig. We do it out of our passion. But it's basically a course called Thrive RX, which is a practical guide to flourishing for physicians by physicians. And you can find more on that course at positive-medicine.com, which is my website. And, check it out. It's 7.5 CME hours, and it's priced just to cover CME. It's really just our attempt to give back to the profession that's been so good for all of us. And it focuses on personal well-being, professional fulfillment, and financial independence, all 3 pillars, which are, I think, very important for physicians to create a flourishing life in medicine.
And the title of your book again?
Book is Positive Philosophy, Ancient and Modern Wisdom to Create a Flourishing Life. That's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, both in print and through Kindle, I think.
Yes.
And I have read the introductory pages, and it looks like it's a great work. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. And with that, Dr. Sanj Katyal, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Randy. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening today. Remember, you can get more information about our guests as well as hear them face my rapid-fire questions at our Patreon site. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, and hopefully offer suggestions on what you'd like to hear in future episodes. Thanks very much also to Ryan Jones, who composed and performs our theme music. That's all we have for now, so please be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.